Inflation went up. Your rent went up. Your grocery bill went up. Your salary had a meeting about it and got back to you 3 months later with a 2% offer. But David's net worth just went up too. Not despite inflation, because of it. And here's the part that should genuinely bother you. David didn't get lucky. He didn't inherit anything. He didn't time the market or take on reckless risk. He just knew 10 specific moves that wealthy people have been quietly using for decades to make sure that every time the cost of living rises, their portfolio rises with it. This video is those 10 moves. Every single one. 2 people. Same city. Same inflation pressing down on both of them. David is 34. Not a finance professional. Not wealthy by inheritance. Just someone who, 3 years ago, sat down and asked one question most people never think to ask. Which assets go up when everything else gets more expensive? Then he built his life around the answer. Sophie is 33. Smart, disciplined, genuinely responsible with money. She tracks every pound, saves consistently, never makes impulsive decisions. By every conventional measure, she's doing everything right. But her savings sit in a bank account earning 1.2%, while inflation runs at 5%. Every month Sophie saves, she quietly loses purchasing power without spending a single penny. David and Sophie earn almost the same, live in the same neighborhood, shop at the same supermarket. Inflation is doing completely opposite things to their lives. The only difference is 10 moves, and one of those moves involves something Sophie was actually doing right. She just didn't know there was a way to make it work against inflation instead of for it. Here's what nobody ever explains properly about inflation. Most people treat it like weather, something that happens to you. Something you complain about, adjust your grocery list around, and eventually absorb. The price of eggs went up. The rent notice arrived. The petrol station number ticked higher. You adapt and move on. That's the civilian relationship with inflation. But here's what most people get wrong. Inflation doesn't destroy wealth. It moves it. Every year, inflation runs above your savings rate. Purchasing power transfers out of cash accounts and into assets, out of fixed salaries and into businesses with pricing power, out of people who are waiting and into people who already positioned. This is where inflation secretly transfers wealth, quietly, automatically, without announcing itself on any statement or notification. The wealthy don't absorb inflation. They position ahead of it. They own assets that rise when the cost of everything else rises. The rich don't avoid inflation. They use it. And the transfer is happening right now, tonight. While this video is playing, the question isn't whether it will affect you. It already is. The only question is which direction it's flowing. 3 years ago, David and Sophie had almost identical financial snapshots. Same income bracket, same city, same rising cost of living pressing down on both of them equally. Sophie was actually the more disciplined one on paper. She tracked her spending in a budgeting app. She cooked at home 4 nights a week. She skipped the holidays her colleagues were booking and told herself she was being responsible. David wasn't flashy either. 4-year-old car, no designer anything. Nothing about his life looked like someone who was quietly building a portfolio designed to profit from inflation. But every single month, without drama, without anyone noticing, he was doing something Sophie wasn't. He was converting cash into assets before inflation could eat it. And here's the part that makes this genuinely uncomfortable. Sophie was doing everything conventional wisdom told her to do. Work hard, save more than you spend, keep your money safe. For years that felt like enough. It felt responsible. It felt like the right move. But here's the thing about conventional wisdom. It was written for a world where your savings rate beats inflation. That world stopped existing. Inflation doesn't create a stable world. Inflation creates a moving target, and you cannot save your way to a moving target. You have to reposition toward it. Sophie was running on a treadmill and calling it progress. David was moving in the direction the money was actually flowing. Let's put real numbers on this. Not to make Sophie feel bad, but because the feeling of falling behind is one thing. The mathematics of falling behind is something most people have never actually seen written out. Sophie has £20,000 in a savings account. Her bank pays 1.2% annually. End of year 1, she earns £240 in interest. Sounds fine. Until inflation running at 5% erodes £1,000 of purchasing power from that same balance. Net result after interest? Sophie's £20,000 has the real purchasing power of roughly £19,240. She didn't spend anything. She didn't make a single mistake. She still lost ground. Year 2, same story. Year 3, same story. By the end of 3 years, Sophie's £20,000 has the real purchasing power of approximately £17,400. She saved diligently, touched nothing, and quietly lost £2,600 in what her money can actually buy. Now watch what David does with the same £20,000. £8,000 into a diversified index fund averaging 9% annually. £7,000 into a real estate investment trust paying inflation-adjusted quarterly dividends. £5,000 into inflation-linked gilts and instruments specifically designed to rise with the cost of living. End of year 1, David's £20,000 is worth approximately £21,800 in real purchasing power. Not just nominally, actually. Year 3, his portfolio sits at roughly £24,500 to £25,200. Same starting amount, same time period, same inflation environment bearing down on both of them. Sophie has £17,400 in real value. David has £25,000. That gap didn't come from luck. It didn't come from risk. It came entirely from knowing which side of inflation to stand on. And most people never even knew there were two sides. Here's what never makes the headline. Inflation doesn't just raise prices. It quietly rewrites the rules of every financial decision you've already made. And most people don't notice until the damage is years deep. The hidden cost of cash. Every pound sitting in a low-interest account is depreciating in real terms every single day. Not dramatically, not in a way that shows up on any statement. The number on the screen stays the same or even grows slightly. But what that number can actually buy shrinks every single month inflation runs above your interest rate. It feels like saving. It functions like a slow leak nobody told you about. The hidden cost of a fixed salary. If your income rises 2% this year and inflation runs at 5%, you just took a 3% pay cut. Nobody called it that. Your payslip didn't say it. But in real terms, that's exactly what happened. Sophie got a 2% raise last April. She went home feeling good about it. She was quietly poorer than she was 12 months before. The hidden cost of waiting. And this is the one most people watching this right now are currently paying. Every month spent thinking about investing rather than actually investing is a month of compounding permanently lost. But in an inflationary environment, waiting doesn't just cost opportunity. It costs purchasing power on top of opportunity. A double penalty. Arriving silently, billing you anyway, no invoice, no notification, just a number that buys slightly less than it did last month. Here's what most people get wrong about all three of these costs. They're not bad luck, they're not random. They are the predictable, mechanical consequence of holding cash while inflation runs. David understood all three before Sophie knew any of them existed. That's not intelligence, that's just information. And information is the cheapest asset in the world to acquire, which makes what you're about to see more uncomfortable, not less. Year 4. Everything shifts. Sophie's rent goes up 8%. Her car insurance jumps. Her weekly shop costs £40 more than it did 18 months ago. The budgeting app is still accurate. The discipline is still there. But the ground underneath her keeps moving faster than the numbers can keep up. She mentions it to David over coffee. Expects sympathy. Gets a question instead. What is your money actually doing while you sleep? Sophie doesn't have an answer. Because the honest answer is nothing. It's sitting there, waiting, losing, doing exactly what a savings account does in an inflationary environment. Shrinking in every way that actually matters, while the balance stays technically the same. David doesn't say it to embarrass her. He says it because it's the only question that matters when inflation runs hot. Saving is not enough. Saving without positioning is just a slower way to fall behind. And then he shows her exactly what he's been doing. Not complicated, not exclusive, not reserved for people with more money or more connections or more time. Just 10 moves. The same ones he'd spent 3 years quietly building into the background of his financial life. The same ones she could have started with the money already sitting in her account. This is where inflation stops being something that happens to you and starts being something you use. Move 1. Real estate exposure without buying a property. Most people hear real estate investment and immediately picture something that requires a second mortgage, a letting agent, and a weekend spent fixing someone else's boiler. Here's what David actually did. He bought into a real estate investment trust. Fractional ownership. No tenants, no maintenance calls, no 6-figure commitment. Just direct exposure to property values and rental income that automatically adjusts upward when inflation climbs. Think about this. When your landlord raised your rent last year, David's REIT dividend went up with it. He's on the landlord side of that transaction without owning a single property. Move 2 is one most people get completely wrong. They think it's a growth investment. It isn't. And the distinction matters more than most finance channels will tell you. Move 2. Commodities. Gold, oil, agricultural assets. Here's the thing nobody explains about this category. Most people who own commodities own them for the wrong reason. They're not a growth investment. They're inflation insurance. And there's a crucial difference. Growth investments make you money when markets do well. Insurance pays out when things go wrong. When the cost of living spikes, raw materials move first, before the headlines, before the panic. Commodities whisper what inflation is about to do before anyone else is listening. David holds a measured position here not for excitement but for timing, as an early warning system for his other positions. Move 3 is where most investors make a mistake that seems small but costs them enormously over time. They own stocks, but they own the wrong kind. Move 3. Pricing power stocks. Not just any stocks. Two companies can look almost identical on a balance sheet and perform completely differently when inflation runs. The reason comes down to one question. Can this business raise its prices without losing its customers? David holds companies that don't just survive inflation, they profit from it. Essential consumer goods, utilities, healthcare. Businesses selling things people cannot stop buying regardless of price increases. They raise prices, protect margins, and pass every penny of inflation directly onto the customer. The shareholder benefits. Every single time. The other kind of company, the one selling the same product as 3 competitors at a price customers can compare in seconds, absorbs inflation. Their margins compress quietly, their earnings fall, their stock underperforms exactly when everything else is going wrong. Owning stocks is not the same as owning inflation protection. The difference between those two things is the difference between David's portfolio and a standard index during a high inflation period. Move 4 tends to get ignored because it isn't exciting. That's exactly why it belongs on this list. Move 4. Inflation-linked bonds. There are financial instruments that were specifically engineered by government treasuries to solve one problem and one problem only. Make sure your money doesn't lose purchasing power while sitting still. They're not spectacular in calm markets. That's not the point. Think of it this way. Your car insurance doesn't make you money on the years you don't crash. That doesn't make it a bad investment. It makes it insurance. Inflation-linked bonds are insurance for the one risk that a savings account is completely defenseless against. In an inflationary environment, they do one job with perfect precision. They make sure your capital doesn't silently shrink while you sleep. Sophie's savings account was supposed to do this. It was never built to. Move 5 involves owning something that no central bank decision can dilute. And that sentence will make more sense after the last 3 years of monetary policy. Move 5. Hard assets. Here's a category of asset that has preserved value across centuries of currency collapses, monetary policy experiments, and inflationary cycles. Physical things with intrinsic value. Things that exist regardless of what any institution decides to print, issue, or devalue on a Tuesday afternoon. Not a speculation, a hedge, against the specific risk that savings accounts are entirely defenseless against, the quiet erosion of purchasing power through decisions made by people you've never met, in buildings you've never been inside, about a currency you have no choice but to use. 5 moves in, let's pause and run the numbers forward, because this is the point where the gap between Sophie and David starts doing something the human brain has trouble processing intuitively. 10 years, same £20,000 starting point. Sophie's savings account at average 1.5% annual interest grows to £23,200 nominally. After inflation averaging 4% across the decade, that £23,200 is worth approximately £15,700 in today's purchasing power. She saved consistently for a full decade and ended up with less than she started with in any meaningful sense. Not because she did anything wrong, because she did nothing different. David's first 5 positions combined grow to roughly £30,000 in real purchasing power over the same decade, from the same starting amount. And moves 6 through 10 haven't even started compounding yet. Here's where it gets interesting. Move 6. Dividend growth stocks. Not high yield. Growth. The difference is enormous and almost nobody explains it clearly. A high-yield dividend stock pays you a large percentage today. A dividend growth stock pays you a smaller percentage today that increases every single year, regardless of what the economy is doing. One is a fixed income in a world where fixed incomes lose value. The other is an income that outruns inflation automatically. David holds positions in businesses that have raised their dividend consecutively for a decade or more. When inflation runs at 5% and your dividend grows at 7%, you're pulling ahead, quietly, automatically, every single quarter without a single decision required. The compounding on a rising dividend isn't just mathematical, it's psychological. Most investors check their portfolio when prices are volatile and feel the urge to change something. A dividend that keeps rising regardless of price volatility gives you a concrete reason to do nothing, which is, paradoxically, the most valuable thing you can do. Move 7 is the one I promised at the start of this video, the one that involves debt, the one wealthy households are using aggressively, while most people are doing the opposite. Here it is. Move 7, fixed rate debt used deliberately. Here's the counterintuitive thing about inflation that took David 3 years to fully internalize, and that most people never learn at all. Inflation doesn't just affect assets, it affects liabilities too, and it affects them in the opposite direction. When inflation runs, the real value of a fixed debt shrinks, every single year, automatically, without any action required. David has a fixed-rate mortgage. He borrowed a specific amount at a fixed nominal rate. Since then, inflation has been quietly doing something his bank cannot stop, eroding the real value of what he owes. He is paying back tomorrow's debt with yesterday's money. The purchasing power required to clear that mortgage is smaller every year, while the asset attached to it appreciates in nominal terms above inflation. The bank cannot change the terms. Inflation does the work for him. Now here's the part that genuinely surprises people. Sophie, in her commitment to financial responsibility, has been making extra overpayments on her mortgage every month. She's proud of this. It feels like exactly the right thing to do. But in a world where inflation is running at 5% and her mortgage rate is fixed below that, every overpayment she makes is retiring cheap debt with expensive money. She is voluntarily giving up the one financial product that was quietly working in her favor. The wealthy don't pay off their fixed-rate mortgages early. They hold them for as long as possible and put the extra capital to work somewhere else. The bank cannot change the terms of a fixed-rate mortgage. Inflation does not ask permission. David just has to hold. Move 8 gives even people without a mortgage access to the same underlying principle. Move 8, business ownership, even fractional. A side business or equity stake in one gives David something that employment cannot provide, no matter how good the salary. Think about what actually happens during inflation. Costs rise. Materials, wages, energy, logistics. Every business faces this. The question is, what happens next? Can the business pass those rising costs forward to its customers, or does it have to absorb them? Employees always absorb them. Consumers partially absorb them. Owners pass them through. There is a structural wall between what inflation does to someone who earns their income and someone who owns the engine that generates it. Employees watch their real wages shrink during inflationary periods. Business owners raise prices. Same inflation, completely different outcome. David is on both sides of that wall, which is why inflation pushes him forward while it holds Sophie in place. Move 9 captures this same dynamic across hundreds of businesses simultaneously, without having to pick a single one. Move 9, broad index funds. This is the move that sounds too simple to deserve a place on this list, and that's precisely why most people underestimate it. Hundreds of companies simultaneously. When inflation drives revenue higher across entire sectors, the index captures every gain without David picking a single winner or making a single active decision. Diversification doing exactly what it was designed to do. But here's the part that almost never gets said out loud. The index doesn't fail investors. Investors fail the index. Every time a market drops and someone moves to cash, until things stabilize, they lock in the loss and miss the recovery. Every time a market rallies and someone finally buys in because it feels safe, they buy at the top. The average investor in a broad index fund earns meaningfully less than the index itself returns, not because of fees or bad luck, but because of behavior. David doesn't watch his index fund. He doesn't have alerts set for price movements. He added to it every month for 3 years without looking at what the units were worth. That discipline, the willingness to be bored, is itself a financial asset, and most people don't have it. The last move is the one David would say created all the others, because without it, none of the first 9 are accessible. Move 10. Investing in himself. The highest returning asset David owns isn't in any brokerage account. It doesn't appear on any statement. Nobody can dilute it, devalue it, or take it from him through a policy change. It's the expertise that makes him genuinely difficult to replace when companies are cutting costs in every direction. Skills that command higher income regardless of what inflation does. The one investment with zero correlation to market cycles, because it isn't in any market. Here's the implication that most people resist. Every pound invested in genuinely differentiating skills compounds in 2 directions simultaneously. It grows your income, which funds all the other moves, and it protects that income, which means the other 9 positions never get liquidated in an emergency. Sophie has been investing her spare pounds in a savings account. David has been investing his in things that cannot be inflated away. The visible gap between them, 17,400 pounds versus 42,750 pounds after 10 years, is partly the mathematics of the 9 financial positions, but it starts with the 10th, because a higher income is the asset that makes all other assets possible. So who wins? The honest answer is that this was never a fair fight. Not because David is smarter than Sophie, not because he earns more or takes bigger risks or has access to some exclusive financial universe she couldn't enter. It was never fair because David was playing a completely different game. Sophie was playing defense, save more, spend less, hold tight. That strategy works beautifully in a stable world. But inflation doesn't create a stable world. Inflation creates a moving target, and you cannot defend your way to a moving target. You have to reposition toward it. David was playing offense. Every time inflation ticked up, at least one part of his portfolio ticked up with it. His real estate exposure rose. His pricing power stocks protected their margins. His fixed-rate debt shrank in real terms. His dividend growth compounded above the inflation rate. His commodities moved before the headlines caught up. He wasn't just protected, he was profiting. And here's the number that settles it permanently. 10 years. Same starting amount, same inflation environment. Sophie, 15,700 pounds in real purchasing power. David, 42,750 pounds. The winner isn't David. The winner is the approach. And here's what makes this genuinely important and why it matters beyond the numbers. Sophie didn't lose because she was careless. She didn't lose because she lacked discipline. She lost because the financial advice most people receive, save more, spend less, keep it safe, was designed for a world that no longer fully exists. Nobody told her the rules had changed. Nobody showed her there were 2 sides. David didn't win because he worked harder or took bigger risks. He won because someone, somewhere, showed him information that most people never encounter. A framework. 10 moves. That's what you just got. The only question left, the same one David asked Sophie over a cup of coffee on a Tuesday afternoon, is what you do with it now. What is your money actually doing while you sleep? Inflation already knows the answer. The only question is whether you do too.